All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Adding in a marker command for easy editing, and we're going to continue where we left off yesterday. So we had just gone through. Okay, we're talking about the ability to undo commands here. So we're adding into our interface the undo method. And so if we take a look at our playground, we don't have an interface here because we're working with JavaScript. That's not necessarily a big problem for us. It just means that our main class, so we have constructor. So we're gonna have to handle an undo function, and then that's gonna be in command. And that's sort of like an interface. It's implementing the signature of a function, but it's not actually doing anything. An undo method reverses game state changed by corresponding execute method. Here's our previous move command with undo support. So we had this move unit command. Okay, so let's see. Move unit command takes in the unit X, unit Y. That's not really a big difference. Execute. Okay, so X before and Y before. So we're going to memorize that. Okay, I see. So here's our constructor. So we now need to see X before and Y before. And we don't, what is this? Is this a tuple? That actually looks like it is. It's a, well, maybe it's not. X before, Y before. That looks like it's maybe just the type. So if we just say X before and we just purposely set it to null, so that way we don't have anything. Y before. We're just basically adding it in here so that we can use it. Or is that setting it as a default to 0? So I can just say, okay, well, we're starting at 0, 0. Now, every time we do a move, we have to store this. So X before equals the internal unit stored. So this dot unit dot location dot X, this dot Y before, this dot unit dot location dot Y. And now we are going to implement undo. Unit move to X before Y before. Okay, so this dot unit move to this dot X before, this dot Y before. And okay, so we still have unit, X before, Y before, and int and Y. Those are private. We don't really have privacy in JavaScript yet. But that's how we would implement undo. Now, to me, this implements one level of undo. So we can only undo one turn as far as I can tell. Because the X before and Y before is not an array storing all the previous turns. Now that we added some more state to the class, when a unit moves, it forgets where it used to be. If we want to be able to undo that move, we have to remember the unit's previous position ourselves. which is what X before and Y before do. This seems like a place for the memento pattern, but I haven't found it to work well. Since commands tend to modify only a small part of an object's state, snapshotting the rest of its data is a waste of memory. It's cheaper to manually store only the bits you change. Persistent data structures are another option. With these, every modification to an object returns a new one, leaving the original unchanged. Through clever implementation, these new objects share data with the previous ones, so it's much cheaper than cloning the entire object. Using a persistent data structure, each command stores a reference to the object before the command was performed, and undo just means switching back to the old object. So that might be something like an array of move commands, and then storing which ID we're currently on, I think. To let the player undo a move, we keep around the last command they executed. When they bang on Control-Z, we call that command's undo method. If they've already undone, then it becomes a redo, and we execute the command again. So we need to store the state of, like, if we're undoing or redoing. Chantilly, good morning. Welcome to the stream. I hope that you're having a good day today. How's it going? It's going pretty good. There's been tons of meetings for me at work. So doing this in the morning has been really, really awesome because I haven't been able to program very much. At work, that is. Supporting multiple levels of undo isn't much harder. Instead of remembering the last command, we keep a list of commands and a reference to the current one. When the player executes a command, we append it to the list and point current at it. Okay, so that looks like an array. When the player chooses undo, we undo current command and move the current pointer back. When they choose redo, we advance the pointer and then execute that command. If they choose a new command after undoing some, everything in the list after the current command is discarded. The first time I implemented this in a level editor, I felt like a genius. I was astonished at how straightforward it was and how well it worked. It takes discipline to make sure every data modification goes through a command, but once you do that, the rest is easy. I think so. This is really the big thing here. The discipline to keep using these patterns after we've initially created them. Chantilly, you subscribed to Twitch Prime. Thank you so much for the subscription. Thank you. You've been subscribed for 6 months and you're on a 4-month streak. Awesome. Well, I hope, thank you so much for that, and awesome to have you here. Redo may not be common in games, but replay is. A naive implementation would record the entire game state at each frame so it can be replayed, but that would use too much memory. Instead, many games record the set of commands every entity performed each frame. To replay the game, the engine just runs the normal game simulation, executing the pre-recorded commands, which I guess if there's like a certain amount of randomness to things, that won't really work as well. But if the game doesn't have randomness, then I think that works really well. Classy and dysfunctional. Earlier I said commands are similar to first-class functions or closures, but every example I showed here used class definitions. If you're familiar with functional programming, you're probably wondering where the functions are. I wrote the examples this way because C++ has pretty limited support for first-class functions. Function pointers are stateless. Functors are weird and still require defining a class. And the lambdas in C++ 11, that plus looked weird, are tricky to work with because of manual memory management. That's not to say you shouldn't use functions for the command pattern in other languages. If you have the luxury of a language with real closures, by all means, use them. In some ways, the command pattern is a way of emulating closures in languages that don't have them. I say some ways here because building actual classes or structures for commands is still useful, even in languages that have closures. If your command has multiple operations, like undoable commands, mapping that to a single function is awkward. Defining an actual class with fields also helps readers easily tell what data the command contains. Closures are a wonderfully terse way of automatically wrapping up some state, but they can be so automatic that it's hard to see what state they're actually holding. For example, if we were building a game in JavaScript, we could create a move unit command just like this. Function make move unit command that takes in the unit and the x and y coordinates. And then it returns a new function that calls unit.move to x and y. So this is a classic closure in JavaScript, and it's also a higher order function because it returns a function, well, a reference to a function. And this function has access to the outside state, this one. We could add support for undo as well using a pair of closures. So make move unit command. So then we just store x before and x after. We return, and so now we're returning an object that has two methods on it: execute and undo. And then these are the exact same that we have here on. If you're comfortable with a functional style, this way of doing things is natural. If you aren't, I hope this chapter helped you along the way a little bit. For me, the usefulness of the command pattern really shows how effective the functional paradigm is for many problems. All right, and then C also, you may end up with a lot of different command classes. In order to make it easier to implement those, it's often helpful to define a concrete base class with a bunch of convenient high-level methods that the derived commands can compose to define their behavior. That turns the command's main execute method into the subclass sandbox pattern. How do I make search go away? You're taking up space. In our examples, we explicitly chose which actor would handle a command. In some cases, especially where your object model is hierarchical, it may not be so cut and dried. Can't tell if like the trucks that are driving outside were capturable by my microphone. An object may respond to a command, or it may decide to pawn it off on some subordinate object. If you do that, you've got yourself the chain of responsibility pattern. Some commands are stateless chunks of pure behavior, like the jump command in the first example. In cases like that, having more than one instance that class wastes memory since all instances are equivalent. The flyweight pattern addresses that. So if we didn't use this not captured, oh, perfect, thank you. If we didn't use the flyweight pattern, and we haven't gotten to that yet, but obviously we'll be getting to that eventually, then we're forced to essentially make a singleton. And if we take a look at this, our jump command here is a singleton. It's only ever going to be created once and then passed in. And then he has this last note. You could make it a singleton too, but friends don't let friends create singletons. Singletons, from my experience, once you start making them, it's really easy to continue to make them. But also, it's really easy to accidentally start using them in ways that they're not meant to be used. They make it harder to test the code if you're going to write unit tests. Basically, it makes things not as awesome. So yeah, basically like switching around and not using singletons would be good here. So if we were to basically move to his functional style, if we were to change this code here, So we have our input handler class. Now this input handler kind of feels like a singleton as well, because it feels like we're only calling this once in our setup. And so I wonder if there's going to be a pattern that allows us to avoid that. Or you thought this book was about, oh, I know, it kind of felt like it was. But something that I learned recently is that, for example, the solid principles, or a lot of game programming patterns, a lot of just programming patterns in general, a lot of them are written in an object-oriented way because that's so popular, and oftentimes that's where like they came from. But there's often also functional answers to every single one, and most functional programs have the ability to implement these features as well. For example, polymorphism, that's not an object-oriented only thing. That works with both functional and object-oriented languages. For the like 90%, 95% of languages support it. All right, so let's take a look at how we would implement this as just like functions. What is polymorphism? So polymorphism is the idea of creating a function or a class, or maybe like a series of functions or classes that can do multiple things. So, and let me see if it's always hard to come up with an example off the top of my head. Especially like if I'm trying to think of something game design related. If we have two different types, so JavaScript's not necessarily the best thing to use here because the types are sort of really weak. But if we have almost like a Rust type, so if we have two it's gonna hate me for this. If we have like a struct player and a struct AI, those are two different types now. Now I can make them one type again by putting them in an enum because they can only be one or the other. But if I wanted let's say a function to be polymorphic with the player and AI, I need to be able to handle the similarities between the player and AI. And there's actually going to be a lot of things. So for example, the player is going to have to capture keyboard input. That's potentially one of the only things that are different about the player. Thank you, Dark Sky. It's going to be warm today. Okay, so the player is going to have like maybe capture keyboard input, but it's also going to have a location. Well, so is our AI. It's going to have a location. Crucial Ori, hello, good morning. So because of this, we could say, hey, there's this duplication between player and struct, but there's also this like extra stuff here. So polymorphism, and I'm still learning a bit about this myself, so I may be actually getting this explanation wrong. And so if I am wrong, please let me know in the comments or just in chat here. We want to be able to create some kind of function or struct that can handle both of these and potentially stitch them together. So if I create just a struct, instead of like creating a struct player or AI, a struct entity, and now I just put location. Now I don't need to put the location in the player. I don't need to put the location in the AI. And we, like in a classic object-oriented, I would then say, okay, well, the player is going to extend entity. Unfortunately, in Rust, we'd have to do something like implement, this would probably be like a trait, entity. And now I can have, okay, well, players have the entity traits, and AI have the entity traits, but then also players have like some other traits as well. And that way they're sort of like, it's able to handle like whatever I want. I don't think I've got a good explanation for that yet. I'm not able to really create the metaphors that I need at this point in time. So as I learn it better and more, I will be able to create those descriptions off the top of my head. But until then, yeah, my manager or my boss was telling me about polymorphic database relationships, and what the benefits of those would be. And then a mentor that I have talked to me about, hey, no, don't use that. Instead, do polymorphic controllers for a single table in a database. It can get pretty crazy. So as soon as I understand all that, that might be a different tutorial, but that's not game development. Let's get back to this. So we want to essentially create our make unit. So we need to create our space. So let's go ahead and open up our game and take a look at it. So I have it running on port 3000 or 3002. 3000. I think 3000. So here's our game. It looks like I'm losing. Okay, not frames in our. We're not losing frames in OBS. I just lost frames locally in the game as it was sort of like loading up everything into memory. Now it looks like it's fine. So here's our very simple game. I have to press the spacebar to jump. So we want to change that and maybe make something like, we could just put like a simple button down here. When we click it, we want the ability to rebind the spacebar to something else. Yes, lots of things to learn. Oh yeah, there is so much awesome stuff to learn in development. And you can learn them for like by doing game development and then apply them to business development. That's what I think is the most exciting thing to me, is because then it could be fun to learn all this stuff. All right, so here we have our main sort of game. And we want, we can put a button down here. We could do this and actually index the HTML too. We could just sort of say at the bottom of the body, let's create a button. We can have an on click. Let's just create the button first. And in here we'll say rebind jump. Or maybe it can be rebind jump, and then after this it can be currently. Oh, I don't necessarily have a good way to like do that. Let's just say rebind jump. Kind of scared to learn game dev. Everyone is saying the industry is rough. I can't disagree with you for that. So I won't necessarily suggest that you go into game dev for a career, but you can do like really, really basic game dev just like this. Like, this is not a game that anybody is going to be willing to buy, but I am using this to learn game, or just not even game, programming patterns. That is an architectural thing. So these are the types of things that can help move you from like junior to mid, mid to senior, senior to architect, and so on. Just implementing the game and like getting it to work, that can get you into junior level. All right, and then I need to wrap this in a div so that it is up here. Now, nothing happens when I click it because it's not set for anything. So let's go ahead and create we will create a form. You think only some patterns apply to game dev? You guess it depends. Yes. Although I was actually thinking about the command pattern could be useful in database management specifically. So you want to basically be able to say, okay, I have a single giant table, and I want in my database. And I want to be able to, when like a GET request comes in, get only certain parts of that out. Well, that might be like a really gnarly SQL command that has to go and grab that stuff. Well, what if I store the SQL commands as these commands? The fact that I'm saying commands for it is a hint that it might be usable as with this command pattern. And it's that way I can inject the pattern in that I want to do. And also undo, that's a super, super, super common thing that we want to implement for a lot of our users. So let's say we're creating like an email client. Well, they deleted an email. We want to allow them to undo the deletion of that email. This command will allow us to implement that really easily. Okay, so we have rebind jump. That means we want to come back to game here. And so I'm going to create a just a plain old function right here that's global. So we're going to do function rebind jump. Now, if I call rebind jump, it gets... I guess this is a little bit interesting. Like, do I want it to be out here, or do I need it to be actually like part of the game? Maybe it does need to be part of the game, so I can like capture using. Well, it doesn't matter. I can still capture like whatever is pressed. So maybe I do want this to be like. If I hit this button, there is P5JS like ways to do buttons and like other types of stuff. I haven't looked into it though yet. But if I click this and I bind it now to rebind jump. So onClick equals rebind jump. I think it's just like that to hand it the reference to the function. I can console log rebinding. So when I hit this, it doesn't find rebind jump. Okay, it was the same spelling. Do I have to actually call the function when I hand it to it? That seems a little bit... Okay, yeah, I do. So I have to call the function to hand it to it. I guess that's because it's HTML, so it's not really calling it at this point of time. But I do need to tell like where it is. Then I need to have some way to like now say, okay, I am now capturing what I am now going to be capturing the next. So the next key that I press needs to tell me what jump is. I'm going to continue learning machine learning. You seem cool. You followed. Hope to see me again. Oh, awesome. Thank you. Also, machine learning. If you're learning machine learning, you can do game dev. But good luck with machine learning. That seems awesome. And thank you for the follow. Okay, so I have this, which that tells me I'm probably going to want some kind of like state for capturing the jump command. So let's we'll do let capturing jump, or maybe like rebinding jump, equals false. When we come here, we're going to set it to be true. So rebinding jump is now going to be true. And then that means in draw, so we're going to now have this, I guess like it's part of our state, like we have this entire state management thing going here, where we have, okay, if the game is running, then do this entire thing, else do this entire thing. But we also need to have like, hey, if we're doing our recapturing, so probably a if rebinding jump. So if that is true, then I'm going to want to like probably return early, because like it doesn't matter if we're game running or not running. We want to rebind jump. Now the next key that we press, we now need to like set as our jump key. And we remember that we were doing that through, where was this? There's this bind up key code that's part of input handler. So we need an input handler that has these methods on it that allows us to rebind. So we're going to create that for ourselves. This unfortunately looks like a singleton. So I'm hoping that we're going to learn another game pattern that allows us to move away from this. So we're going to call this the input handler. I should probably give it a .js. All right, so class input handler. We can actually put our some like the state management stuff for like, are we rebinding and all that stuff in here. So we're gonna have a constructor. So we can have this dot rebinding jump, and it's gonna be set to false just to begin with. And then we also are going to want to say, okay, this dot jump key code equals whatever like the space jump key code is. And I think that's 32. And we can just say this is space. Okay, so that gives us that. Now we want a bind. So we want a bind method that's going to take a, is it going to take a new key code? Or is it going to check the key code? Because like, hey, if we're rebinding, then just call the bind key for jump, right? So if we're rebinding jump, all right, so if we're at bind, then we might need to choose which one we are rebinding. Okay, so now we need to check to see what the key code pressed is. I think we need to get that from p5.js. I think that's under events. So key code, key pressed. Huh, it doesn't. Oh, here it is. The key press function is called once every time a key is pressed. The key code for the key that was pressed is stored in the key code variable. Oh, it's a function that's called every time a key is, okay, so that's not helpful to me. I want the ability to just run this looping every single time that we're in that sort of rebinding state. So where's our events? Maybe key typed? Key is, no, not key is down, because that's going to be like which key, we have to pass it in which key is down. No, don't want that. So key is pressed. Ha! Key is pressed is just true if any key is pressed. So that's not helpful. Okay, here he goes. Key. The system variable key always contains the value of the most recent key on the keyboard that was typed. To get the proper capitalization, it is best to use it within key typed. For non-ASCII keys, use the key code variable. So I'm not sure this is helpful to me, because what if somebody presses the button and then I immediately check, but they haven't pressed the next key yet? So I don't think that's helpful. Key pressed. I suppose the key press function is called once every time a key is pressed. The key code for the, I mean, I could just record this down. Oh, I could basically start recording this, but only after our state is set up. How about anything else? Okay, yeah, I don't see any other way for us to do that based upon just this documentation. So key pressed. So we're going to want to define that key pressed whenever oh, it sounds, so we're going to have this in like the global space, I think. Okay, so if we have the input handler, this rebinding jump equals false. When this rebinding jump equals true, then we're gonna eventually key pressed will be called, so that'll be probably in game here. We'll have to have this function key pressed. So this will be pressed every single time, like this will be called every single time a key is pressed. So we're gonna need to instantiate the input handler and then check to see if we're in sort of like rebinding. I think that there's a getters. Do we have the ability to do getters in native JavaScript? I don't remember. I think it's get. I have to remember how to do this. MDN class getter. Okay, so it's just get and then the function definitions. So is rebinding. And then we're just going to return a Boolean. So this is going to be return this dot rebinding jump. And so like that's kind of all it is right now. If we have more keys, we can do this dot rebinding jump or this dot whatever the other ones. And then that way I can now say, okay, if we are rebinding jump, then we are rebinding. So now I can, in the game, let's bring in input handler into index.html too. We need that above our game. So what is that? That is input handler. Now in our game, we can instantiate this. So let input handler equals new input handler. Okay, so if the key is pressed, we then need to check, are we in a rebinding state? So if input handler dot, what did I put that at? That is rebinding. Okay, so it's the way that the getters work is they're just like properties, or at least that's as far as we can tell. They're just properties. Also, that's Rust terminology. We need parentheses for this. All right, so if input handler is rebinding, so if we are in a rebinding state, now we need to key pressed. I think there's a better one, isn't there? There's one that will like pass me in the key, right? Or is it just key? And then we can just, so that's just key code. So then we can now go into, and we have this bind function. We're going to take in the key code. And then we also need to check, take in, like, what are we rebinding? Like, and we can maybe do a getter itself for exactly which one we are rebinding. This might be a little bit interesting. Because we need to know, like, okay, we're rebinding jump specifically. So we need to set the jump key code to 32. We right now we only have one key. That's not necessarily like a problem. I could just set that to it. But what if we want to add another key in to like shoot something down? Well, suddenly we're going to have to refactor this entire thing. That seems pretty likely. We are able to handle that. Bind key code. I should probably have a getter for like what we are rebinding. making me think that we might want to store and inside this object colon is false. And so everything can be like set up as false initially with this. And then of course we have make this twice here. I wonder if I can rebound. We're not allowed to have non-bound keys. Like that could be a design. Instead of rebinding state, I could just have bind, just jump, and this would be 32, which return. So now let, I guess, the command in keybinds. So binds of command. So if any of otherwise. Now, what is rebinding? We want to do a very similar thing. So for let command in this dot keybinds. And now this one is this same exact thing here. If this dot that is equal to null, return the command. Return null. We're nothing is happening. Okay. So now in our game here, if input handler is rebinding. So if we are rebinding, then we need to call the input handler dot bind, and I think it's just key code is now inside of our input handler, we have the key code, but we need to dot what is rebinding. Once we have that, because it's possible that this is null. So if rebinding key, then this out, like what that is. So let's go back to the game here. Binding jump. Actually, at this point in time, we're automatically rebinding false. If we click the rebind jump button, we set rebinding to be true. And when we rebind is now false. Now, we probably don't want to have this like global rebinding jump anymore. No, we want to ask the input handler, are we rebinding anything? And this is rebinding here. So we already have rebind jump. I wonder if I can just say input handler dot rebind jump. So that would maybe be a function in here. And I wonder if I can do one better and just basically say I want to rebind and then which command that is that I care about. So if I have rebind, or maybe like start rebinding. And then it's going to be the command we're going to take in, and then we're going to say this dot keybinds of command and set this equal to null. And then that's going to be a sort of our first full circle. Now we're going to have ways to like set it to null, which puts us into a rebinding state, and then we rebind it, which then, you know, takes us out of the rebinding state. in our index.html, when we click this rebind jump, it's no longer just rebind jump now. Now we want it to be our input handler dot start rebinding and pass it in the command that we want to rebind. So I think just jump. Just like that. This rebind jump function put Chantilly, you have lots of channels that I want to create. Like I have one idea, which is maybe like the Rust what. So I could work on that one. But if any of you have any ideas for emotes for the channel, please let me know, like in comments or just like tweet at me. I'll ask some of my friends too if they have any ideas. And then I'll just like slowly start adding them in. I think I can do like 1 to 3 emotes right now. All right, so we have this. Now I want to, straight up in the game, I want to display. So we have this text. Let's just put it right next to the text score. So we're gonna do text. We have this dot keybinds jump and then the number. So we can do space bound to input handler dot keybinds dot jump. And let's put this, so this is 5 over to the right, so we'll do 5, and then maybe we'll do like 40 down. So if I do that, let's see what we got here. So space bound to 32, and that just works. If I click rebind jump, it's, well, that didn't work too well. That became null. Oh, I don't think it's like refreshing anymore properly. But if I now press like A, oh, that didn't work at all. Okay, so it kind of worked. So it's set to whatever this is. If I rebind jump, yeah, okay. So still a space. So let's find out where that is, where that problem is. Space bound to null right now. So if it's null, is rebinding, are we handling this? So let's put a console log in here. I might have, is there like an is null? Or no, that's is nan. So if I click rebind jump, this is no longer, it's not calling. Oh, okay. Type error, input handler bind jump is not a function. So that's right here. Bind jump is not a function. So if we go to input handler, it's just bind. So save that. So rebind jump, space bound to 17. Working. Well, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not actually doing anything to this to like make it work. It's still saying, hey, whenever the space button is clicked, run. Now, why we're getting like this weird on like null is a little bit. Now, that's a little. It shows like null for a little bit, and then it like switches over. So it's when I hit M again, it sort of goes in. So I don't know if like the rebind is happening at the exact times that I want it to happen. Or maybe it's like when I've, oh, you know what? I bet it is. When I hit this, I still have my focus on the button. If I click into the game and then I hit M, now it's exactly what I want it to be. Something's inside of P5.js. Okay, not a huge issue. So that works. Let's see. Key code space. We don't need this anymore. If I want to actually use that key to jump, we need to find out where our, here it is. If key is down, keyboard space, player.jump. So we need to go back to our sort of playground here to see how we want to like handle that to completely implement this. We have the bindings. We need to set to create the command for the jump command. And then pass that in. So input handler does this. Then we need to have a handle input on our input handler. It will check to see what key is down and return the jump command. So maybe in our input handler, we put the actual jump command, which just executes the actor.jump, which then of course we have to pass in. And I don't necessarily want that. I wonder if that would be okay to put that in here. So if I put something like, yeah, I don't think it belongs in here. Like the jump command should probably be passed in. Maybe something like we could have commands. And then we can have, okay, this dot commands equals commands. The commands I'm thinking could be like an object of the different commands here. So when we instantiate our input handler down here, we're going to want things like, okay, function jump command, maybe even like generate commands. And this is going to return an object that has jump on it. Jump is going to be a function that takes in a actor and then calls actor.jump. So then in here, we're going to call generate commands to pass in the return value, which is all of these higher order functions. So now an input handler, here are all these commands that are just sitting there for us. We can now handle input. So we need to like figure out what the key code coming in is. And maybe we can just use that global, the same thing that we did here. Where is that? handle input. So we just check to see down, get what the key is down, or if the key is down, this returns the jump button. And then handle move input, that just tells, that returns like what we're doing. So this will return the function. Okay, got it. So handle input, we can then say if we need to get the current key that is down, let's make let's store this for next time, because I don't have time to like fully implement this. So if let's see, get what key code is down. Specifically, we want to get what command is being pressed. So find what command is being pressed, if any. Return command. Otherwise, return null. So that will allow us to say, okay, if 32, for example, if we haven't rebound, if 32 is the key code that's being pressed, map that to the jump. So, okay, so let's just say what key code is being pressed, what command is associated with that key code. Return the command, otherwise return null. Then in the main game, we're going to call the handle input. It's going to figure out what's being input, and then we're going to you are upset. Technically, the code thinks that we're using it, implementing to